The universe held its breath in the space between them. In the dim amber light of the shelter, the howling wind outside ceased to exist for Jackson Vane. All that mattered was the trembling warmth of Alara's skin against his palm. She looked up at him, her violet eyes wide not with the fear of the hunted, but with the terrifying clarity of the bond that now hummed between their heartbeats. It was a psychic bond, rare and overwhelming, a resonance that should have forced her into submission. "You are not doing it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thrum of the heaters. "The pull. It is there, but you are not pulling." Jackson leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers, sharing the oxygen, sharing the moment. "I'm not a handler, Alara. I'm just a guy who fixes broken things." "Biology demanded a master," she breathed, her fingers tightening on the fabric of his flight suit, anchoring herself to him. "But you, the human, offered a choice." The electric shock of her realization surged through him, a wave of pure, unfiltered emotion that no machine could replicate. He wasn't her owner. He was her emotional anchor. And for that choice, for this single moment of defiant peace, he knew he would burn down the entire galaxy. 12 hours earlier, the only fire Jackson felt was the stinging bite of sub-zero wind on Niflheim 4. The ice planet was a blinding expanse of white, a frozen tomb where the Syndicate buried its secrets and its waste. As a systems engineer, Jackson was supposed to be another cog in the corporate dystopia, keeping the atmospheric scrubbers running while looking the other way. But when the faint distress signal ghosted across his scanner, glowing with a desperate rhythm, he couldn't just log it and leave. Protocol dictated he wait for authorization. Authorization meant death. "Forget the manual," Jackson muttered, overriding the safety locks on his all-terrain rover. He punched the ignition, the engine roaring a challenge to the storm. This wasn't just a repair job. It was a rescue mission. He drove straight into the whiteout, the vehicle shuddering under the assault of the blizzard. The coordinates led him to a jagged ridge where the snow was churned up by a violent impact. There, half buried in the ice, lay the twisted metal of an unmarked transport. It wasn't Syndicate tech. It was sleek, alien, and shattered. Jackson grabbed his thermal cutter and bailed out into the storm. The wind hit him like a physical blow, but he pushed forward, the beam of his cutter slicing through the frozen hull. He wasn't a soldier, but engineering had taught him that leverage could move mountains. He pried the access hatch open, and the cold air rushed out, replaced by the smell of ozone and fear. Inside, huddled together in the failing light, were two figures, Alara and her sister, Kaylin. They were alien fugitives, their skin shimmering with frost, their life signs critical. Jackson didn't hesitate. He pulled Alara into his arms, activating his suit's emergency heat transfer. The moment their thermal layers touched, the world tilted. A sharp, high-frequency ring spiked in his mind, not a sound, but a connection. A sudden, visceral awareness of her fear, her pain, and her sudden, shocking relief. He had triggered something ancient. The Syndicate expected a soldier. They got an engineer who weaponized the truth. But right now, All Jackson knew was that he had found something worth saving. "Stay with me," he yelled over the wind, lifting her weight as if gravity had forgotten them. "I've got you." The wind at Outpost Zenith screamed a different song than the storms on the surface. Here, high on the orbital spire, the air was thin, sharp, and vibrated with the roar of incoming engines. Jackson worked furiously at the main console, his fingers flying across the haptic interface. Behind him, Elara and Kaelin stood watching, no longer huddled refugees, but witnesses to a desperate gamble. "They are here," Kaelin said, her voice tight. Through the reinforced viewport, the sky tore open. 3 Syndicate cruisers dropped out of warp, their hulls gunmetal grey and bristling with intent. They didn't look like rescue ships. They looked like a cage closing in. "Let them come," a voice crackled over the local comms. Rogue Captain Ryla Cross sounded almost bored, though the proximity alarms on her corvette, docked at the spire's edge, were blaring. "My engines are hot, Jackson. We can run the blockade, but it'll be tight." "No running," Jackson said, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. "Running makes them prey. We need to change the game." The lead cruiser hailed them. The face that appeared on the outpost's main screen was smooth, bureaucratic, and terrifyingly calm. "Surrender the biological assets, Engineer Vane. This is a misunderstanding. Return them, and your contract violations will be overlooked." Elara stiffened, the psychic bond flaring hot with panic. Jackson felt it, a physical spike of adrenaline that wasn't his own. He didn't push it away. He let it ground him. He looked at the Syndicate officer, then at Elara. Empires fear the moment disposable workers decide to be heroes. "They aren't assets," Jackson said, his voice steady, "and I'm not negotiating." He slammed his hand onto the enter key. He hadn't been charging weapons. He had been aligning the outpost's deep space array, bypassing the corporate firewalls to create a direct, unblockable uplink to the galactic core. He wasn't aiming a laser. He was aiming a spotlight. "What did you do?" the officer demanded. The calm cracking. "I just turned on the lights," Jackson replied. The broadcast went live. Not a plea for help, but raw data. Jackson streamed the footage from his helmet cam, the frozen wreckage, the sisters' critical condition, the undeniable evidence of the Syndicate's cruelty, but he overlaid it with the telemetry of the bond itself. He showed the galaxy not just the crime, but the humanity of the victims. It was non-violent resistance amplified by terabytes of undeniable truth. "Look at them," Jackson shouted, turning the camera on himself and the sisters. "They feel, they choose, and they chose freedom." The political standoff shifted in seconds. Across the sector, independent channels picked up the signal. The space opera of war was replaced by the silence of judgment. The Syndicate could glass a moon, but they couldn't fight a narrative that had already spread to 1 billion screens. To destroy the outpost now would be an admission of guilt so loud it would shatter their stock prices and their treaties. "Sir, attack on the cruiser's bridge," whispered, audible over the open channel. "We have multiple incoming signatures, civilian fleets, media drones. The coalition is asking for a status report. The officer's face went pale. Transparency as defense had paralyzed them. Withdraw! The officer snapped, cutting the feed. The cruisers hesitated, looming like storm clouds before their engines flared blue. They turned, breaking orbit, retreating back into the dark. Silence returned to outpost zenith, heavy and sweet. Ryla Cross laughed over the comms. Well, I'll be damned. You didn't just poke the bear vein. You invited the whole zoo to watch it trip. Jackson slumped against the console, the adrenaline crashing. He felt a hand on his shoulder. Elara was there. The bond between them had settled into a steady, warm hum, a promise of safety. Cold preserves the body, she said softly, repeating the words of her people's oldest proverb. But compassion ignites the war. Is the war over? Kaelin asked, looking at the stars where the ships had vanished. Jackson looked at Elara. The galaxy knew their names now. They were targets, symbols, and perhaps the start of something new. But as he looked into her violet eyes, he didn't feel the weight of the universe. He felt the strength of the choice they had made. No, Jackson said, taking Elara's hand. The war is just starting, but this time we aren't fighting it alone. The HFY spirit wasn't about conquering the stars. It was about having the audacity to tell the universe that some things were not for sale. And as they stood together in the light of the nebula, Jackson knew they had already won the only victory that mattered.